The Texas sun did not simply set, it bled into the horizon. It was a slow, violent hemorrhage of crimson and burnt orange that stained the sky and turned the muddy waters of the Red River into a moving mirror of fire. Clara Avery sat on her customary limestone rock, the one that jutted out over the water just enough to keep her boots dry while the river licked at the stone beneath. She was 23 years old, an age where the women of Dusty Ford were expected to be bouncing a second child on their hip and worrying about the price of flour. Instead, Clara was worrying about the horizon. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around her shins. The fabric of her dress was faded calico. Washed so many times, the floral pattern was merely a suggestion of what it used to be. The air smelled of wet clay, sagebrush, and the cooling heat of the day. She told her mother she came here to check the water levels for the ferry crossing, or to gather driftwood. But that was a lie. She came here to wait? For what? She could not say. It was a hollow ache in the center of her chest, a feeling that the life she was living, the life of counting pennies, mending nets, and smiling politely at men she did not respect, was a coat that did not fit. It was too tight in the shoulders, too short in the sleeves. There was something wilder inside her, something that thrummed in time with the cicadas singing in the cottonwood trees. But she had no name for it. She only knew that every time the sun went down, she felt a desperate urgency, as if the day was closing a door she had failed to walk through. "You are going to catch a chill, Clara," she whispered to herself, her voice lost in the rushing sound of the current. She stood up, dusting the red dirt from her skirts. The river was the lifeline of the Avery family, and lately it felt more like a noose. The Avery homestead sat a quarter of a mile back from the bank, a weathered structure of timber and stone that seemed to lean away from the prevailing wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stewed beans and the sharp, metallic tang of anxiety. Martha Avery was at the table, her hands moving ceaselessly over a pile of darning. She was a woman who had been beautiful once, before the frontier wind stripped the softness from her skin and widowhood stripped the light from her eyes. "Ben is late," Martha said, not looking up. Her voice was tight. "He is checking the trot lines." "Mama," Clara said, hanging her bonnet on the peg by the door. "He will be back before dark. It is already dark, Clara, and with the talk in town." Martha let the sentence trail off, snapping a thread with her teeth. Clara moved to the stove to stir the pot. "Talk is all it is, just old men at the saloon trying to scare each other." "It is not just talk," a voice came from the back door. Ben Avery stepped in, bringing a gust of cool evening air with him. At 16, he was all elbows and knees, trying desperately to fill the boots of the father they had buried 3 years ago. He carried a string of catfish, slick and whiskered. "I saw the dust cloud to the west, and Silas Burke says the railroad surveyors are moving closer. That means the army is moving closer. And that means nothing good for anyone." Clara finished for him, taking the fish. They ate in relative silence, the specter of the ledger book sitting on the sideboard watching them. The Avery land was prime real estate, the only flat crossing point for miles, but the ferry traffic had slowed as the drought lowered the river, and the note at the bank was a heavy stone around their necks. $500. It might as well have been 5,000. "I saw Elias Cooper in town today," Martha said suddenly, her spoon clinking against the tin bowl. She did not look at Clara. Clara felt her stomach tighten. "Did you?" "He asked after you. He said his father is very concerned about our situation. He said he would like to speak with you tomorrow." Ben snorted. "Elias Cooper is concerned about getting his hands on our river frontage. That is all. He does not care if we starve, as long as he owns the crossing when the railroad comes." "Benjamin," Martha snapped. "Elias is a decent man. He is safe. He can provide, and God knows what we need to provide for." Clara set her spoon down. The beans tasted like sawdust. "I will go see him, Mama, but I am not promising anything." The next morning, the town of Dusty Ford was a cacophony of hammers and shouting. It was a place that had existed for 20 years as a sleepy collection of shacks. But the rumor of the railroad had turned it into a boomtown overnight. Speculators, gamblers, and laborers swarmed the dusty streets like ants on a dropped piece of candy. The focus of this chaotic energy was usually found holding court on the porch of the newly built hotel, Silas Burke. He was a large man, with a waistcoat that strained against his belly and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He claimed to be a representative of the railroad, a land developer, a man of vision. To Clara, he looked like a vulture in a silk tie. She walked past him, keeping her head down. "Miss Avery," Silas called out, his voice booming. "Fine morning. The river looks low. Bad for the ferry. I suppose excellent for bridge building, though—" Clara paused, forcing a polite nod. "The river rises and falls, Mr. Burke. It always has. Progress does not wait for the tide, my dear," Silas said, tipping his hat. "Tell your mother I will be stopping by later. We have business to discuss regarding the deed." Clara hurried on, her heart pounding. They were circling like wolves. She reached the brick building that housed the bank and the law offices of the Cooper family. Elias Cooper was waiting for her. He was 30 years old, with soft hands and hair that was always perfectly pomaded. He was the golden boy of Dusty Ford, the man who would inherit the town, or at least the parts of it that mattered. "Clara," he said, rising from his mahogany desk. He gestured to a velvet armchair. "Please, sit. Can I get you some water or perhaps tea?" "I am fine. Elias," Clara said, remaining standing. "Mama said you wanted to speak with me." Elias sighed, a practiced sound of sympathy. He walked around the desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and appraisal, the way one might look at a horse they intended to bid on. "I wanted to speak to you about the foreclosure notice," Elias said softly. "My father, he is a businessman. Clara, he looks at the numbers. And the numbers say the Avery ferry has not turned a profit in 6 months. The interest is compounding. We have a good crop of corn this year," Clara said, though she knew it was weak. "And once the rains come—" "The rains might not come for months. The bank wants the land. Clara, Silas Burke is offering cash for the debt, plus a little extra for you and Martha to move east, maybe to St. Louis." "This is our home," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly. "My father is buried on that ridge." Elias took a step closer, invading her personal space just enough to be uncomfortable. He smelled of lavender soap and stale paper. "There is another way," he said. "A way that keeps the land in the family. A way that ensures your mother never has to worry about a ledger again. And Ben could go to a proper school in the city." Clara knew what was coming. She had seen it in his eyes for months. "Marry me, Clara." He said it as if he were offering her a business partnership. Elias, I do not know what to say." "Say yes," he urged, reaching out to take her hand. His palm was damp. "It makes sense. You need security. I need a wife who understands this town, who has standing. We would be a formidable pair. I can make the debt disappear with a stroke of a pen. The railroad is coming. Clara, this town is going to be a city. You could be the queen of it." Clara looked at his hand holding hers. It was a safe hand, a clean hand, a hand that had never calloused from rowing a ferry or chopping wood. It was the answer to every prayer her mother had whispered at night. "I cannot give you an answer today," Clara said, pulling her hand back gently. It is too much to decide in a moment." Elias's smile faltered, just for a second, before returning to its polite mask. "Of course, it is a big decision. But Clara, do not take too long. Silas is pushing my father to sell the note to him. I can only hold the wolves at bay for so long. Give me an answer by the end of the week." Walking home, Clara felt like she was breathing underwater. The air was thick with dust and heat. Marry Elias. It was the logical, responsible thing to do. She would have a fine house, silk dresses, and servants. Her mother would be safe. Ben would have a future. But the thought made her chest ache with that same familiar hollowness. It felt like surrender. It felt like dying without ever having really lived. She took the long way back, cutting through the scrub brush near the river bend to avoid the main road and the prying eyes of the town. The sun was high now, baking the earth. As she stepped down into a dry creek bed that fed into the river, she froze. The mud here was still soft from a secluded spring. In the center of the creek bed, clearly pressed into the red clay, was a hoof print. Clara knelt. It was small, unshod. The horses in town were all large draft breeds or thoroughbreds, shod with iron by the blacksmith. This was a pony's track, quick, agile. And there, half buried in the sand next to a cluster of sage, was a shaft of wood. Clara picked it up. It was the bottom half of an arrow. The fletching was turkey feather, dyed with berry juice. The wood was smoothed not by a machine, but by a knife and a steady hand. Comanche. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The stories in town were full of blood and smoke. They called them raiders, savages, ghosts that came in the night to steal cattle and burn homesteads. The government said they were all supposed to be on the reservation in the territory north of the river, but everyone knew the Quahati bands were still roaming, refusing to surrender the old ways. She looked around wildly. The brush was silent. A hawk circled overhead, screaming once, a lonely, piercing sound. There was no one there, but the track was fresh. Maybe an hour old. She dropped the arrow shaft and scrambled up the bank, her skirts tangling in the briars. She did not run, but she walked with a speed that bordered on flight. When she reached the edge of town, the atmosphere had shifted. The hammers had stopped. A crowd had gathered outside the general store. "I am telling you, I saw the smoke!" A man was shouting. It was Old Man Miller, who lived 5 miles out. "Just past the ridge. 2 steers gone. Cut right out of the herd." "It is them," a woman whispered, clutching her shawl. "The Comanches." Silas Burke was there, standing on a crate to elevate himself above the crowd. His face was grave, but Clara thought she saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Now, good people," Silas bellowed, holding up his hands. "Let us not panic, but let us be realistic. The savages are desperate. They know the railroad is coming to bring civilization to this land, and they hate it. They hate us." "What are we going to do?" someone shouted. "The army is 3 days' ride away." "I have sent a telegram to the fort," Silas announced. "But until they arrive, we must protect ourselves. We must secure our borders, and we must consolidate. Those of you living out on the fringes, it is not safe. The railroad company can offer you fair prices for your land. Now, bringing you into the safety of the town limits, do not risk your families for a few acres of dirt." Clara watched from the periphery. It was a performance, a masterclass in fear. Silas was using the rumor of the Comanche, whether true or not, to drive the price of land down and force the holdouts to sell. And Elias was standing next to Silas, nodding solemnly. Clara turned and walked away. She felt sick. When she returned home, Martha was pacing the porch. "Thank God," Martha breathed when she saw Clara. "Did you hear people are saying there are Indians in the river valley?" "I heard," Clara said quietly. She did not mention the hoofprint or the arrow. She could not bear to add fuel to her mother's terror. "Did you see Elias?" Martha asked, grabbing Clara's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I did. And he asked me to marry him." Martha let out a sob of relief, sagging against the porch railing. "Oh, praise be. Oh, Clara, you said yes, didn't you? Tell me you said yes." "I told him I needed time," Clara said. Martha's face hardened instantly. "Time, Clara. We do not have time. Did you not hear the men in town? If the tribes are raiding, we are defenseless out here. If we are family to Elias Cooper, we are protected. We are safe. How could you be so selfish?" "I am not being selfish. Mama, I am trying to breathe," Clara snapped, the frustration finally boiling over. "I am 23 years old, and I am being sold like a broodmare to cover a banknote." "You are being saved," Martha shouted back. "Do you think I wanted to be a widow at 40? Do you think I wanted to bury 3 children before Ben was born? Life is not about breathing. Clara, it is about surviving. You live in a fairy tale if you think otherwise." Clara stared at her mother. She saw the fear etched into every line of Martha's face. It wasn't cruelty. It was panic. But it did not make the cage feel any less suffocating. "I am going for a walk," Clara said, her voice cold. "Do not go near the river," Martha called after her. "It is getting dark." Clara ignored her. She walked past the barn, past the empty corral, and down the winding path through the cottonwoods. She reached the riverbank just as the sun began its final descent. The world was bathed in a strange, bruised purple light. The crickets were starting their nightly chorus, a rhythmic thrumming that seemed to vibrate in her bones. She stepped onto her rock. The water was black now, with streaks of gold where it caught the last of the light. It looked like oil. It looked like ink. Clara stood there, breathing in the cool, damp air. She closed her eyes. She tried to imagine life with Elias. A clean house, a full pantry, safety. But when she pictured his face, she felt nothing, just a gray, flat emptiness. She opened her eyes and looked across the river. The opposite bank was Indian territory. It was wild, untamed land, shadowy thickets of brush and towering oaks. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a shadow separating itself from the darkness of the trees, a stillness that was somehow different from the stillness of the wood. She froze. The hairs on her arms stood up. She was being watched. She should be afraid. She should run back to the house, bolt the door, and load the shotgun. That was what a sensible woman would do. That was what Martha would do. But Clara did not run. She stood rooted to the rock, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stared into the deepening gloom across the water, searching for the shape of a man, or a horse, or a ghost. The wind shifted, carrying a scent across the water, wood smoke and something muskier, like leather and horse sweat. "Who is there?" she whispered, the sound swallowed by the river. There was no answer, just the sound of the water rushing over the stones, endless and indifferent, but the feeling remained. A connection, a tension that pulled tight across the expanse of the water like a violin string waiting to be plucked. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, plunging the world into gray. The knife edge of light on the water vanished. Clara shivered, not from cold, but from a sudden, terrifying realization. She wasn't afraid of the darkness on the other side. She was curious. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The afternoon sun hung heavy over the red river, a brooding, white-hot eye that bleached the color from the sandstone and turned the air into a shimmering curtain of heat. It was 2 days after Clara had felt the eyes watching her from the darkness, and the sensation had not faded. It had only burrowed deeper, like a splinter under the skin. Clara moved through the tall grass near the ferry landing, the hem of her dress heavy with dust and burrs, in her hand. She carried a woven willow basket covered by a checkered cloth. Inside lay a loaf of cornbread, wrapped in linen to keep it warm, and a small jar of pungent herbal salve, a mixture of beeswax, turpentine, and comfrey that her mother, Martha, swore could heal anything from a burn to a broken heart. She was not supposed to be here. She had told Martha she was going to check the snare traps in the lower thicket, but she was here because of Ben. Earlier that morning, while Martha was occupied with the laundry, Ben had pulled Clara aside behind the woodshed. His face had been pale, his eyes shifting nervously toward the river. "I saw him again. Clara," Ben had whispered, his voice cracking. "The man across the river, he is hurt. I saw him trying to wash a wound in the shallows before he rode back into the trees. He looked bad." Clara had gripped her brother's shoulder. "You stay away from there. Benjamin, do you hear me? If Silas or the men in town see you looking at a Comanche, they will think you are signaling them." "I am not signaling anyone," Ben had hissed. "But he is bleeding, and he did not shoot at me. He just looked." So here she was, walking toward the enemy line with a basket of bread, driven by a curiosity she could not name and a strange, protective instinct that made no sense. The river was low, exposing long stretches of red mud that cracked in the heat. Clara reached her usual spot, the limestone rock that jutted out over the water, and set the basket down. She scanned the opposite bank. The trees there were dense, a wall of shadow against the glare of the sun. "I know you are there," she said. Her voice felt small, swallowed by the rush of the water and the wind in the cottonwoods. She waited. A dragonfly buzzed near her ear, iridescent blue. A turtle slid off a log with a soft plop. Then, the brush on the far bank parted. It was not a ghost that emerged. It was a horse, a paint mare, sleek and muscular, stepping carefully down the muddy bank, and on her back sat the man. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron, and her fingers closed around the cold steel of her father's Colt revolver. She did not draw it, but she held it tight, the weight of it grounding her. He was real. He was a Comanche warrior, just as the terrified whispers in town described. But he looked nothing like the monsters in Silas Burke's stories. He wore buckskin leggings that hugged powerful legs, and his chest was bare, bronze and slick with sweat. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, with a single feather tied near the ear. But it was his shoulder that drew her eye. A dark, jagged tear marred the skin on his left side. The blood dried and caked, looking angry and inflamed against his dark skin. He held the reins with his right hand. His left arm hung uselessly at his side. He stopped the horse at the water's edge. The river was perhaps 50 feet wide here, separated by a deep channel. He looked at her. His face was striking high cheekbones, a strong nose, and eyes that were dark and unreadable across the distance. He did not raise a weapon. He did not shout a war cry. He simply watched her with a terrifying calmness. Clara pulled the pistol from her pocket. Her hand trembled, the barrel shaking as she pointed it across the water. "Stay back," she shouted. The gun felt heavy, foreign in her hand despite the practice she had had shooting tin cans. "I know what you are. I know what you do." The warrior did not flinch. He did not even look at the gun. He looked at her face, his gaze sweeping over her frantic expression, her white knuckles, the basket at her feet. A corner of his mouth lifted. It was not a sneer. It was almost amused. "You hold that iron like it is a venomous snake. Woman," he called out. His voice was deep, carrying easily over the water. His English was rough, the vowels flat and hard, like stones grinding together, but it was clear. "I know how to use it," Clara retorted, though her voice wavered. "Turn around. Go back to your people. If you cross this river, I will shoot." "If I wanted to cross," he said calmly, urging his horse a step into the shallows, "I would have done so before you ever saw me. And if I wanted you dead, you would not have heard me coming." The blunt truth of his words struck her. He was right. He was a warrior. She was a ferryman's daughter in a faded dress. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "Why are you watching us?" He shifted on the horse, and a grimace of pain tightened his jaw. He touched his injured shoulder briefly. "I am watching the river. It belongs to no one." "The town says you are raiders," Clara said, the accusation spilling out of her, fueled by the fear Silas had planted. "They say you steal cattle and burn farms. They say you kill children." The amusement vanished from his face. His expression hardened, turning as cold as the river bottom. "They say many things," he said. "They speak with forked tongues to steal land that is not theirs." He paused, his eyes narrowing on her. "And tell me, woman at the crossing, did the boy tell you I was a killer, the boy with hair like dried straw?" Clara froze. "What boy?" "The one who fell into the river yesterday," the warrior said. "The current is strong by the bend. He swims like a stone. He would be feeding the catfish now if I had not pulled him out." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The memory of Ben came rushing back yesterday evening. Ben coming home soaking wet, shivering, claiming he had slipped while checking the lines. He had been pale, terrified. Martha had scolded him for being careless. "You..." Clara lowered the gun slightly. "You pulled him out." "I pulled him to the sandbar," the warrior said. "I was turning to leave when the shot came, a rifle from the ridge, A white man's bullet for a good deed." He gestured to his shoulder. Bad aim, but it was enough. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Ben had been shot at. No. Ben hadn't said he was shot at. Ben had said he saw a man hurt. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Ben hadn't been shot at. The shooter, likely a hunter or a nervous guard from the railroad camp, had seen a Comanche near a white boy and fired. They hadn't seen a rescue. They had seen an attack. And Ben... Poor, terrified Ben had run away, too scared to tell anyone that the monster had just saved his life, leaving his savior bleeding in the mud. Shame, hot and sharp, flooded Clara's chest. She looked at the pistol in her hand, the weapon she was pointing at a man who had saved her brother. Slowly, very slowly. She lowered the hammer and shoved the gun back into her apron pocket. "It was Ben," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Then, louder, "That was my brother. He did not tell me." "Fear makes men silent," the warrior said. He looked tired now, the adrenaline of the encounter fading into the reality of his pain. He swayed slightly in the saddle. Clara looked at the basket at her feet. The bread, the salve. She had brought it on a hunch, a vague notion of charity that she hadn't fully understood. Now, it felt like a debt she had to pay. "I have medicine," she called out. "For the wound." He looked at the basket, then back at her. He did not move closer. "I do not need your charity." "It is not charity," Clara snapped, her embarrassment transforming into determination. "It is payment for my brother's life." "Unless you are too proud to take it and would rather fall off your horse and drown." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, a low sound rumbled in his chest. He was laughing. It was a dry, rusty sound. But it was there. "You have a sharp tongue," he said. "Bring it, then." "I cannot cross," she said. "The current is too deep here." She looked around. Near the bank, a large, flat piece of driftwood, bleached white by the sun, was wedged in the mud. It was wide enough. Clara knelt, placing the basket carefully in the center of the wood. She waded into the shallows, the water soaking the hem of her dress, cooling her ankles. She pushed the wood out. The current caught it, spinning it slowly. The warrior urged his paint mare forward. The horse splashed into the deeper water, the river rising to its chest. He leaned down, groaning through his teeth as his weight shifted, and snagged the driftwood with his good hand. He lifted the basket effortlessly and balanced it on the pommel of his saddle. He did not retreat immediately. He sat there, the horse fighting the current, and looked at her. They were closer now, close enough that she could see the fine lines of dirt on his skin, the way his eyelashes were incredibly long, the intense, obsidian depth of his eyes. Clara stood in the ankle-deep mud, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was fear, yes, but it was something else, too. It was the same feeling she had when she watched a lightning storm roll in across the plains, a sense of being near something powerful, dangerous, and devastatingly beautiful. He opened the cloth and looked at the jar. He uncorked it, sniffing the contents. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. "The bread is fresh," Clara said, her voice sounding breathy and strange to her own ears. "And the slave, my mother makes it. It helps with infection." "Your mother," he said, looking up. "Does she know you feed the enemy?" "You are not the enemy," Clara said. "Not if you saved Ben." "To your people, I am always the enemy," he said. His voice was not angry, just resigned. "They see only the paint and the bow. They do not see the man." "I see you," Clara said. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. He went still. The water rushed around the horse's legs, a constant, roaring hush. His gaze locked onto hers, intense and probing. It felt as if he were stripping away the layers of calico and propriety, seeing the restless, waiting thing underneath. "Do you?" he asked softly. He guided his horse a step closer. The animal blew air through its nose, splashing water. "You are brave. Woman of the crossing," he said. A faint smile played on his lips again, teasing this time. "Or perhaps you are foolish. Standing here with wet skirts, talking to a savage while the sun goes down. Clara felt a flush rise up her neck, heating her cheeks. She lifted her chin defiantly. Perhaps I am both, and my name is Clara, not woman of the crossing. Clara, he repeated. The way he said it made the name sound different. He stretched the vowels, making it sound like a song in a foreign tongue. It sounds like clear water. And you, she asked. Do you have a name, or just a reputation? He straightened, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. I am Tahan. Tahan, she whispered. It means one who is hard to find, he said, watching her closely. You were not hard to find today, Clara countered, because I chose to be found. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy and electric. He hadn't just appeared. He had allowed her to see him. He had waited for her. Clara took a step back toward the bank, suddenly overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment. The sun was dipping below the horizon now, casting long, violet shadows across the river. You should go, she said, her voice trembling. If the men from town see you, they will shoot first this time. They are scared, and fear makes them cruel. Tahan looked toward the town, where the faint lights of lanterns were beginning to flicker in the distance. His expression darkened. The warrior returning to replace the man. Let them be scared, he said. This valley was ours before they had names for it. The river remembers. He turned his horse, the animal pivoting effortlessly in the current. Wait, Clara called out. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Will you be all right? The wound. Tahan touched the basket secured to his saddle. I have bread and strong medicine now. I will live. He looked at the western sky, where the last bleeding edge of the sun was disappearing behind the hills. You watch the sunset every day. Clara, he said. It was not a question. How do you know that? I watch the watchers, he said. He gestured to the horizon with his chin. I also have business that requires waiting for the sunset, just like you. He did not explain. He simply kicked his heels gently into the horse's flanks, and the mare scrambled up the muddy bank on the far side, disappearing into the dense veil of the cottonwoods and oaks. Clara stood alone in the river mud. The basket was gone. The driftwood floated away downstream, bobbing in the current. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly shivering in the cooling air. Her heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. She had just aided a Comanche. She had spoken to him. She had told him her name. She was a traitor, by every law of Dusty Ford, by every expectation of her mother and Elias Cooper. She had just committed a crime, but as she climbed back up the bank to the limestone rock, she did not feel like a criminal. She felt alive. For the first time in years, the hollow ache in her chest was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating fullness. She hurried back toward the homestead, keeping to the shadows of the trees. When she reached the back porch, Martha was there, holding a lantern, her face pinched with worry. Clara, Martha cried. Where have you been? It is pitch black. I was about to send Ben to the sheriff. Clara stopped at the bottom of the steps. She smoothed her dress, hoping the lantern light was too dim to show the mud on her hem or the flush on her skin. I'm sorry, Mama, Clara said, forcing her voice to be steady. I just lost track of time. I was walking by the river. I needed to clear my head, to think about Elias. It was a lie. A smooth, easy lie. Martha softened instantly. Oh, of course. It is a lot to consider. Did you decide? Clara looked past her mother, toward the dark line of the river in the distance. She thought of the wound on the warrior's shoulder. She thought of the way he had said her name. She thought of the gun in her pocket that she hadn't used. No, Mama, Clara said softly. I have not decided yet, but I am thinking clearly now. Good, Martha said, ushering her inside. Come eat. The stew is cold, but it is food. Clara followed her mother into the house, but as she sat at the table, listening to the wind rattle the window panes, she knew that the safety of this house, the safety Elias offered, was an illusion. The real world was out there, in the dark, bleeding and riding a paint horse, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that she would go back to the river tomorrow. She had to know if he survived. She had to know what business a Comanche warrior had with the sunset. The conflict had begun. Not the war between the railroad and the tribe, but the war inside Clara Avery. And looking down at her hands, she realized they were still trembling not from fear, but from the memory of his eyes. The ritual began quietly, born of a lie that felt more like a truth every day. "I'm going to fetch water," Clara would say, lifting the heavy oak bucket, or, "The linens need scrubbing, and the river water is softer than the well." Martha would nod, distracted by the ledger or the mending, her eyes always drifting to the shotgun propped by the door. She never stopped worrying, but routine had a way of dulling the sharp edge of panic. For 2 weeks, Clara went to the riverbank as the afternoon heat began to break, and for 2 weeks, Tahan was there. At first, he remained a silhouette on the far bank, a dark shape against the dense green of the timber. He would sit on his paint mare, watching her, sometimes raising a hand in greeting, sometimes just sitting in that unnerving statue-like stillness. Then, as the days turned, the distance between them shrank. He began to ride into the shallows, letting his horse drink while he checked the dressing on his shoulder. They spoke across the water, their voices skipping over the surface like flat stones. "The wound!" Clara called out one Tuesday, wringing out a sheet until her knuckles turned white. "Is it healing?" Tahan guided the mare closer, the water swirling around the horse's knees. He touched the shoulder. "Your mother's medicine smells of pine pitch and old bear," he said, his face serious but his eyes dancing with that faint amusement. "But the fire is gone from the flesh. It heals." "It is not a bear," Clara huffed, fighting a smile. "It is beeswax and tallow." "So you say," he replied. They talked of small things first, safe things, the weather, the height of the river, the hawk that nested in the dead cottonwood. But slowly, the safety eroded, revealing the jagged rocks beneath. He told her of the Quahati bands moving west, chased by the hunger that came when the bison did not return. "The buffalo are the life," Tahan said one evening, his voice rough with a sorrow that made Clara's chest ache. "The white hunters, they take the skin and leave the meat to rot. They kill the spirit of the land. My people are hungry." "Clara, hunger makes men fight when they would rather smoke the pipe." In turn, Clara found herself spilling the poison that had gathered in her own soul. She told him about the banknote that hung over the homestead like a storm cloud. She told him about the railroad surveyors driving stakes into the earth, measuring the world in dollars and miles. "Elias says the railroad brings the future," Clara said bitterly, throwing a stone into the current. "He says if I marry him, I can be part of it. I can be safe." "Safe." Tahan repeated the word, tasting it. He looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "A bird in a cage is safe, Clara, but it forgets how to fly. Is that the future you want to be fed by a hand that owns you?" "I do not want to lose my home," she whispered. "We are the same," he said quietly. "We both fight for the earth beneath our feet. We both have wolves at the door." It was a terrifying realization. The savage and the ferryman's daughter, united by the encroaching iron rails and the greed of men like Silas Burke and Elias Cooper. Then came the evening the sun failed to bring him. It was a Friday. The air was heavy, charged with the static of a distant thunderstorm. The sky was a bruised purple, the clouds piling up like mountains of slate on the western horizon. Clara sat on her limestone rock, her hands clasped tight in her lap. She waited. The sun began its final descent, a bloody disk slipping behind the hills. The shadows stretched out, long and grasping. The crickets began their song, but the splash of the paint mare's hooves did not come. The far bank remained empty. Panic, cold and sharp, bloomed in her stomach. Had the army found him? Has the infection returned, or had he simply moved on? The business of the sunset concluded, leaving her alone with her bucket and her lies. She stood up, scanning the tree line until her eyes watered. Nothing, just the wind and the darkening water. "You fool," she whispered to herself. blinking back hot tears. "You absolute fool! He is a warrior. You are a diversion." She turned to grab her bucket, her heart feeling like a heavy stone in her chest. The sun was gone now, leaving only a fading ribbon of orange light on the water. Then she felt it, a presence, a displacement of the air behind her. Before she could turn, before she could gasp, an arm wrapped around her waist. It was not a rough grab, but it was firm, solid as an iron band. A second arm came up, turning her. She was pulled back against a chest that felt like a wall of warm, living rock. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The smell of him enveloped her wood smoke. Rain and sage. "You watch the horizon too hard," a voice rumbled right beside her ear. It was low, teasing, and vibrated through her entire body. "You miss what is close." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought he must feel it against his arm. She should scream. She should stomp on his foot and run. That was what a decent woman would do. That was what Elias would expect. But she did not run. She melted. The tension that had held her spine straight for years seemed to snap, leaving her leaning into him. You were not there," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I was here," Tahan murmured. His breath was warm on the sensitive skin of her neck, sending a shiver racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold wind. "I crossed at the bend. I wanted to see if you would wait. I was leaving," Clara lied, though she made no move to step away. "You were waiting for the sun to go down," he corrected gently. His arm tightened slightly around her waist, his hand large and warm through the thin fabric of her dress. He was not hurting her. He was holding her, and the difference was shattering. "It is gone," Clara whispered. "The sun is gone." Tahan shifted, turning her slightly so she wasn't quite facing him, but wasn't looking away either. His cheek brushed against her hair. "No," he said softly. "I am your sunset now." The words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning that went far beyond the time of day. "I am your sunset now. I am the end of your day, the thing you wait for, the fire in the sky." Clara turned in his arms, unable to stop herself. She looked up. He was terrifyingly close. In the twilight, the angles of his face were sharp, beautiful, and dangerous. The war paint was gone today, leaving his skin bare and bronze. His eyes were searching hers, asking a question she wasn't sure she knew the answer to. "You should not be on this side," she said, but her hands rose of their own accord, resting tentatively on his chest. His skin was hot. "If they find you, let them come," he whispered. He stepped back, just an inch, breaking the full contact of their bodies but keeping her hand in his. He led her back to the limestone rock. "Sit," he said. She sat. He sat beside her, close enough that their thighs brushed, close enough that the heat radiating from him warmed her against the river chill. He pointed up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to prick through the gloom. "Do you know that one?" he asked, pointing to a bright cluster. "The 7 sisters," Clara said. "We call them the Star Girls." Tahan said, "They were chased by a bear and climbed a rock that grew into the sky to save them." He turned his head, looking at her profile. "Sometimes, to be safe, you must go where the bear cannot follow, even if it is high, even if it is scary." Clara looked at him. "I am tired of being chased. Tahan?" "Then stop running," he said. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was thick, filled with the sound of the river and the thundering of her own pulse. Tahan reached out, his hand, calloused and scarred from bowstrings and reins, cupped her cheek. His touch was impossibly gentle, a reverence that made her breath hitch. He tilted her face up toward his. "Tell me, Clara," he said, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Has the banker's son ever looked at you like this?" "No," Clara breathed. "Has anyone ever kissed you while the sky burned?" She felt a flush rise from her neck to her hairline. "No," she admitted. "Never." Tahan's eyes darkened. "Then he knows nothing of value." He leaned in. Clara closed her eyes. She expected it to be difficult, demanding, but when his lips touched hers, It was a question, not a command. It was warm and firm, tasting of the wild earth and something uniquely him. She gasped softly, her lips parting, and he deepened the kiss. The world fell away. The debt, the railroad, her mother's expectations, it all dissolved into the heat of his mouth moving against hers, the strength of his hand holding her face, the solid reality of his body next to hers. It was a kiss of desperation and discovery. It was the feeling of the river breaking its banks. For a moment, she forgot she was Clara Avery of Dusty Ford. She was just a woman, and he was just a man, and they were the only two people alive under the vast Texas sky. He pulled back slowly, his forehead resting against hers. They were both breathing heavily. The sound loud in the quiet evening. "You are dangerous." "Clara," he whispered, his voice rougher than before. "I am just a girl," she said, her voice trembling. "No," he said, running his hand down the length of her hair. "You are the fire that burns the prairie, and I am standing in the wind." While they sat there, wrapped in the dangerous bubble of their own creation, the world outside was sharpening its knives. A mile away, in the smoky interior of the Dusty Ford saloon, Silas Burke slammed a heavy fist onto the bar. "I am telling you, I saw the tracks!" Silas bellowed to the room full of nervous men. "They are scouting the crossing. My boys found a calf gutted 2 miles upriver. Not eaten, gutted. That is a warning. Gentlemen, that is Comanche savagery." It was a lie. Silas knew it was a lie because he had paid the 2 drifters who did it $10 apiece. But the truth didn't matter. Fear mattered. "We need to petition the fort," Elias Cooper said from a corner table. He looked pale, swirling his whiskey. "If the army sweeps the river, surely that makes the land safe for the bridge." "The army moves too slow," Silas spat. "We need to protect our own. We need to patrol that riverbank, starting tonight." Back at the river, the sound of a snapping twig cracked the silence like a gunshot. Tahan moved instantly. In a blur of motion, he was on his feet, his knife drawn, his body shielding Clara. "Who is there?" he hissed into the darkness. There was rustling in the reeds a few yards away. Then, a figure stood up. It was Ben. Clara scrambled to her feet, her hands flying to her mouth. "Ben!" Her brother stood there, his fishing pole dragging in the dirt, his face a mask of shock and confusion. He looked from Clara, with her flushed cheeks and disheveled hair, to the Comanche warrior standing over her with a knife. "Ben, run!" Clara shouted, terrified that Tahan would strike, or that Ben would scream. But Ben did not run. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto Tahan. He looked at the feather. He looked at the paint mare grazing nearby, and he looked at the shoulder Clara had spoken of. "It is you," Ben whispered. Tahan lowered the knife slowly, but he did not sheath it. "The boy who swims like a stone," he said. Ben looked at Clara. You know him. "He is the one who saved you, Ben," Clara said, rushing forward to stand between them. "He is Tahan. He is not a raider." Ben looked at his sister. He saw the way she stood not as a victim protecting herself, but as a woman protecting a man. He saw the way Tahan looked at her, watchful and fierce. The conflict played out on Ben's 16-year-old face, the duty to his mother, the stories of the town, the loyalty to his sister. "Silas is sending patrols," Ben said suddenly, his voice high and tight. "I heard them at the store. They are coming to the river tonight, with dogs." Tahan sheathed his knife. The romance of the moment vanished, replaced instantly by the cold logic of survival. "How many?" Tahan asked. 6, maybe 7, Ben said. "Silas is paying them." Tahan turned to Clara. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip urgent. "You must go, now. If they find you with me, your life in this town is over." "But what about you?" Clara asked, clutching his forearms. "I am a ghost in these woods," he said. "They will not catch me." He looked deep into her eyes, the memory of the kiss still burning between them, but now overlaid with the shadow of war. "Silas Burke does not just want the land. Clara, He is talking to the bluecoats, the soldiers. He wants to create a war so the army will clear the valley for his train. Tahan's voice was low, intense. I need to know when they move. I need eyes in the town. Clara understood what he was asking. He wasn't asking her to be his lover. He was asking her to be his spy. She looked at Ben, who gave a curt, terrified nod. Then she looked back at Tahan. I will listen, she promised. I will tell you what they plan. Good, Tahan said. He touched her cheek one last time. A brief, searing contact. Go! Run! He swung onto his horse in one fluid motion. With a silent command, the mare plunged into the water, cutting through the current toward the safety of the territory. Come on, Clara, Ben said, grabbing her hand. They ran through the cottonwoods, stumbling over roots in the dark, their breath tearing at their lungs. They reached the edge of the clearing just as the distant barking of hounds began to echo off the river bluffs. When Clara finally collapsed onto her bed that night, her legs were shaking. The house was quiet. Martha was asleep, dreaming of a safe wedding and a paid-off mortgage. Clara touched her fingers to her lips. They felt swollen, tender. They still tasted of him. She had promised to help him. She had promised to spy on her own people. She was a traitor, a liar, and a fool. But as she lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl around the eaves, she knew one thing for certain. She was not waiting anymore. The sunset had come, and it had set her world on fire. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, she did not pray for safety. She prayed for the courage to burn. The crystal goblet in Clara's hand felt heavy, as if it were filled with lead rather than expensive imported claret. The dining room of the Cooper mansion was a testament to the kind of wealth that felt out of place on the frontier mahogany wainscoting. Velvet drapes that suffocated the windows, and a chandelier that cast a fractured, glittering light over the table. More roast beef, Clara, Elias asked, his smile smooth and practiced. He sat at the head of the table, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch he was so eager to become. No, thank you. Elias, Clara said, forcing a polite tone. I am quite full. The dinner was a performance, a celebration of a union that had not yet been formalized but was treated as inevitable. Martha Avery sat to Clara's right, looking more relaxed than she had in years, charmed by the silver and the promise of security. But Clara felt like a fly trapped in amber. Excuse me, Clara said, standing up. I need a breath of air. The heat. Of course, my dear, Elias said. Do not wander far. Silas is due to arrive any moment for brandy. Clara slipped out of the dining room, but she did not go to the porch. She moved down the hallway toward Elias's study, intent on finding a moment of silence. The door was ajar, spilling a slice of yellow light onto the Persian runner rug. Voices drifted out, low, urgent, and conspiratorial. Timing has to be precise. Elias, we cannot have the army stumbling around in the dark for a week. The voice belonged to Silas Burke. Clara froze, pressing herself against the wall. The patrol is already spooked, Elias's voice responded. It lacked the confidence he displayed at dinner. Here, he sounded petulant and nervous. Lieutenant Miller says he needs concrete proof of hostility before he can authorize a sweep of the valley. Oh, then we give him proof, Silas growled. The sound of a heavy glass being set down on a desk echoed. Tomorrow night, I have men ready at the Miller farm. We torch the barn, kill a few heads of cattle, maybe put a bullet in the old man's leg flesh wound only, just enough to make it look real. Clara's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. And the blame? Elias asked. We leave a few arrows, maybe a war shield. I bought some trinkets from a trader in Abilene. The lieutenant finds Comanche artifacts at the scene of a burning farm, and he has his justification. He clears the north side of the river within 48 hours. The tribe goes to the reservation, or they go to the grave. Either way, the land is empty for the track. It is risky. Silas, Elias murmured. Business is risky. Boy, do you want to be the mayor of a railroad hub? Do you want to be a dusty clerk in a ghost town? Decide. There was a pause, heavy and sickening. Do it, Elias said. But keep my name out of the fire, Clara felt the bile rise in her throat. She backed away slowly, her boots making no sound on the rug, until she reached the kitchen door. She burst out into the cool night air, gasping as if she had been underwater. It wasn't just greed. It was a war, a manufactured war that would spill real blood to pave the way for iron rails. And Elias, sweet, safe Elias, was signing the death warrant for Taihan and his people, with a glass of brandy in his hand. She managed to compose herself enough to return to the table, claim a headache, and drag her mother home. The carriage ride was a blur of Martha's chatter about wedding linens, while Clara stared out at the dark shapes of the cottonwoods, seeing only fire. When they reached the homestead, Clara waited until Martha's breathing deepened into sleep before creeping out to the porch. She needed to think. She needed to warn him. "You are going to the river," the voice came from the shadows near the woodpile. Clara jumped, her heart hammering. Ben stepped into the moonlight. He held their father's old hunting rifle, the stock resting easily in the crook of his arm. He looked older tonight. The boyish softness was gone from his jaw. "Ben, go back to bed," Clara hissed. "I know where you go." "Clara," Ben said steadily, "I know who you meet. I saw you 2 days ago. I saw the way he looked at you." "It is not what you think," Clara began, desperate to protect him. "It is exactly what I think," Ben interrupted. He walked up the steps, standing eye to eye with her. "You are involved with him. The Comanche, Tahan." Clara went silent. There was no point in lying. Ben had always been observant, more than anyone gave him credit for. "They are going to frame them." "Ben," she whispered, "the secret's spilling out. I heard Silas and Elias. They are going to burn the Miller farm tomorrow night and blame the tribe. They want the army to slaughter them." Ben's face hardened. He looked toward the town, his expression filled with disgust. "Elias! He agreed to it. He wants the land." Ben's grip on the rifle tightened until his knuckles were white. He spat onto the dust. "I always knew he was a snake, but I did not think he was a butcher." "I have to warn Tahan," Clara said. "If they are not prepared, they will be wiped out." "I know," Ben said. He shifted the rifle. "That is why I am coming with you. I will watch the road while you signal him." "Ben, no, it is treason. If we are caught—" "You saved me." "Clara," Ben said fiercely, "you stood between me and that marriage because you knew it would kill my spirit. Now it is my turn. I am not letting you walk into the dark alone. I am your brother. Let me be a man." Clara looked at him, tears pricking her eyes. She nodded once. "Okay, but we move fast." They moved through the brush like ghosts, avoiding the main road where Silas's hired patrols were likely riding. When they reached the riverbank, the moon was obscured by clouds, plunging the world into a thick, suffocating darkness. Clara made the sound a low, rhythmic whistle mimicking a nightjar, a signal Tahan had taught her. Silence. She did it again. From the darkness of the water, a shape emerged. It was not the horse this time. Tahan waded out of the black water, silent as an otter, water streaming from his bare chest. He had swum across. "You are loud," he whispered as he reached the bank, though his eyes were relieved. He looked at Ben, who held the rifle pointed at the ground. Tahan nodded to the boy, a warrior, acknowledging another. "They are coming," Clara said, breathless. "Tomorrow night, Silas and Elias. They are burning the Miller farm to frame you." Tahan's face went rigid. "A false flag. They want the army to sweep the valley." Clara continued. "You have to leave. You have to move the tribe tonight. There are patrols on the ridge," Tahan said. "If we move the women and children in the dark, we will be heard. We are trapped in the valley until the moon sets." He looked at her, then at the river behind him. "You must come with me." "What?" Clara asked. "I cannot plan this alone. I need you to tell the council exactly what you heard. They will not believe a warrior's guess, but they will believe the woman who sat at the enemy's table." "I cannot cross," Clara said, looking at the black, swirling water. "I cannot swim well." Tahan let out a sharp whistle. A moment later, the paint mare splashed out of the shadows of the far bank. swimming powerfully across the channel. "She will carry us," Tahan said. He grabbed Clara's waist. "Trust me." Clara looked at Ben. "Go home. If Mama wakes up, I will cover for you," Ben promised. "Go!" Tahan swung onto the wet horse and pulled Clara up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his wet skin. The horse turned and plunged into the river. The water rose, cold and shocking, soaking Clara's skirts to her thighs. She felt the powerful muscles of the animal working beneath her, and the solid, unyielding warmth of Tahan against her front. They climbed the far bank and rode deep into the timber. The world here was different. The air smelled of pine resin and ancient earth. They wound through narrow canyons that Clara hadn't known existed, hidden folds in the landscape that swallowed sound. Finally, the valley opened up. Clara had expected a war camp, rows of warriors sharpening knives. What she saw stopped her breath. Dozens of teepees glowed softly from the fires inside, looking like paper lanterns scattered across the meadow. Dogs trotted quietly between the lodges. She saw women grinding corn, their laughter low and soft. She saw an old man teaching a child how to string a small bow. It was a village. It was a home. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "That is all we have," Tahan said. They dismounted near the center of the camp. The arrival of a white woman caused a ripple of silence to spread outward. Eyes watched her dark, curious, wary, but not hostile. They trusted Tahan. He led her to a large central fire where a group of men sat. One of them was ancient, his face a map of deep wrinkles. Wrapped in a buffalo robe, this was the elder. "The daughter of the river comes," the elder said. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. He did not look surprised. "The spirit said the water would bring a bridge. I did not know the bridge would wear a dress." Tahan spoke rapidly in Comanche, his gestures sharp. He pointed to Clara, then to the east where the town lay. A younger warrior stood up. He was broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his cheek. He looked at Clara with open contempt. This was Black Wolf. "You bring a spy into our fire, Tahan," Black Wolf spat in broken English. "She is white. She lies." "She risked her life to cross the water." Tahan growled. "Speak, Clara." Clara stepped forward, her wet dress clinging to her legs, her hair wild. She felt small, but she thought of Elias's smug face, and anger gave her a voice. "They are going to burn their own land," she said clearly. "Tomorrow night, Silas Burke will burn the Miller farm and leave your arrows there. He wants the soldiers to think you are murderers, so they will kill you all." The council murmured. Black Wolf laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Let them come," Black Wolf shouted. "We will ride tonight. We will burn the town before they can burn the farm. We will cut their throats in their beds." "No," Tahan stepped between Black Wolf and the fire. "That is what they want. If we attack the town, we prove them right. The army will hunt us to the last child. We must be smarter." "Smarter," Black Wolf sneered. "You are weak, Tahan. You have spent too much time gazing at the white woman." "Your blood has turned to water." Black Wolf drew a knife from his belt. It was a challenge for leadership. The camp went deathly still. Tahan did not draw his weapon. He stood loose, his hands open. "Put the steel away, brother. We need it for the soldiers. I will use it to cut the weakness from this tribe," Black Wolf roared. Lunging forward, Clara screamed, but the fight was a blur. Black Wolf slashed, a vicious arc meant to maim. Tahan sidestepped, fluid as the river current. He caught Black Wolf's wrist, twisting his body and using the other man's momentum against him. With a sickening crunch of impact, Tahan slammed Black Wolf into the dirt. He did not strike. He held Black Wolf pinned, his forearm across the warrior's throat, his face inches away. "I am not weak because I choose life over death," Tahan hissed. "We do not fight for glory tonight. We fight for survival." He released Black Wolf and stood up. Black Wolf scrambled back, rubbing his throat, humiliated but alive. He nodded once, a grudging acceptance of defeat. "What is the plan?" the elder asked. his eyes twinkling. Clara stepped forward again. Her mind was racing. "If we run, they will hunt you. If you fight, they will kill you. But if we prove Silas is a liar, the army will turn on him." "How?" Tahan asked. "We catch them," Clara said. "When they go to burn the farm, we are there, not to kill them, to capture them. We take Silas's men alive. We drag them before the lieutenant and make them confess. It was a dangerous, insane plan, but it was the only one that didn't end in a massacre." Later that night, the camp was buzzing with quiet preparation. Tahan led Clara to his lodge. It was warm inside, smelling of furs and smoke. "You should go back," Tahan said, turning to her. The adrenaline of the fight had faded, leaving a raw, vibrating tension in the small space. "If the fighting starts tomorrow, I cannot protect you. I am not going back to sit in a rocking chair while you die," Clara said. "I started this. You did not start this. You stepped into a storm." "I chose the storm," she countered. He looked at her, frustration warring with something else in his eyes, admiration, hunger, fear. "Do you understand what they will do to you if they find out they will hang you, Clara, or worse?" "I do not care," she said, her voice shaking. "I cannot marry Elias. I cannot be that woman anymore. I would rather be here, in the dirt, with you." Tahan closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He grabbed her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. "You are foolish," he whispered, "and you are the bravest thing I have ever seen." He kissed her then, hard and desperate. It wasn't gentle like the sunset. It was a collision. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, needing to feel the reality of him. His hands moved down her back, pressing her against him until there was no air left between them. They sank onto the furs. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the canvas walls. His skin was hot against her cool hands. She wanted him. She wanted to lose herself in him, to forget the railroad and the lies and the guns. But as his hand brushed the side of her breast, Tahan stopped. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his forehead resting against hers. "Not like this," he groaned, his voice thick. "Not with death waiting outside the door. When I take you, Clara, it will be when we are free. It will be when I can give you more than a stolen moment in the dark." Clara nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. He was right. They needed their minds sharp. They needed to survive first. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow," he promised. He helped her up, straightening her dress with hands that trembled slightly. "You must go back to town," he said, his voice regaining its command. "We need to know exactly when Silas moves. You are our eyes. Clara, can you do this?" "Yes," she said. She felt a steel rod straighten in her spine. She was no longer just the girl who watched the river. She was a double agent. She was part of the tribe. Tahan rode her back to the crossing just before dawn. The sky was a bruised gray, the sun threatening to rise on the day that would decide everything. He did not kiss her goodbye. He simply gripped her hand, his eyes burning into hers. "Wait for the signal," he said. Clara waded back to the limestone rock, shivering as the cold water soaked her again. She watched him disappear into the mist. She walked back to the homestead, her wet clothes heavy, her heart heavier. She slipped into her bed just as the rooster crowed, lying there, staring at the ceiling. Clara knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had betrayed her race, her town, and her fiancé. She was a traitor. And as she closed her eyes, waiting for the sun to rise, she smiled. She had never felt so clean. The smoke from the burning barn on the north ridge stained the late afternoon sky, a dirty, bruised yellow. It was a signal fire, thick and oily, designed to be seen for miles. Silas Burke stood on the porch of the general store, his face a mask of righteous fury that was almost too perfect. He pointed a trembling finger toward the rising column of smoke. "You see," Silas bellowed to the gathered crowd of townsfolk and the detachment of blue-coated cavalry soldiers who had arrived that morning. "I told you the savages do not wait for nightfall anymore. They strike during the day. That is my fodder barn burning. Next, it will be your home. Next, it will be your children. The town was in a frenzy. Men were loading repeating rifles. Women were weeping, clutching their aprons. In the center of the chaos stood Lieutenant Miller, a young officer with a stiff mustache and eyes that darted nervously between the smoke and the map Elias Cooper was thrusting at him. "The crossing is the choke point. Lieutenant," Elias was saying, his voice high and tight. "If you cross now, you can cut off their retreat to the valley. You can wipe them out before they vanish into the hills." Elias looked the part of the concerned citizen, but Clara, watching from the alleyway behind the blacksmith's shop, saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. He was terrified. He was committing murder by proxy, and his hands were shaking. "We need to move," Ben whispered beside her. They were crouched behind a stack of rain barrels. At their feet lay a man bound with hemp rope, groaning softly through a gag made of sacking. It was Jebediah Smith, one of Silas's hired hands. Clara and Ben had caught him an hour ago, stumbling drunk out of the saloon's back door, bragging to a bottle of whiskey about the easy money he had made lighting a fire. It had taken the point of Clara's skinning knife pressed against his throat to sober him up. He had confessed everything: the kerosene, the dead cow, the false trails, and he had signed his name to a piece of paper Clara had torn from her marketing ledger. "Get him up," Clara said, her voice cold. Ben hoisted the groaning man to his feet, jamming the muzzle of their father's rifle into Jebediah's ribs. "Walk," Ben commanded. At the ferry landing, the scene was set for a massacre. The soldiers were mounting their horses. The ferry was being prepared to carry the first wave of infantry across the river. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long, blood-red shadows across the water. The hour of the wolf, the hour of the hunter. Silas was already on the ferry ramp, waving his hat. "Forward, boys. For civilization. For Texas." "Stop!" The shout cut through the noise of the horses and the river. It was not a scream. It was a command. Clara marched out from the alley, her dress streaked with dust, her hair coming loose from its pins. She pushed Jebediah forward so hard he stumbled and fell onto the hard-packed dirt of the landing. Every head turned. Silas froze, his hand half raised. Elias Cooper went the color of old parchment. "Clara," Elias stammered. "What are you doing? Get back inside. It is not safe." "It is not safe because of you." "Elias," Clara said, her voice ringing clear in the sudden silence. She held up the piece of paper. "There is no Comanche raid. There is no attack. Silas Burke paid this man $10 to burn his own barn. He shot his own cow." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lieutenant Miller frowned, guiding his horse closer. "Miss Avery, what is this?" "It is a confession." "Lieutenant," Clara said, walking straight up to the officer's stirrup. She ignored the way Silas was descending the ramp, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Signed by the man who lit the match. Silas and Elias want you to clear the valley so they can sell the land to the railroad without a treaty. They are using the United States Army as their private hit squad." "She is lying," Silas shouted, pushing his way through the crowd. "The girl is hysterical. She has been distraught over the debt on her farm. She does not know what she is saying." Silas reached her, grabbing her arm roughly. "Go home, Clara, before you embarrass yourself further." Clara wrenched her arm free with a strength that surprised him. "I am not the one who should be embarrassed. Silas, I am not the one with blood on my hands." "She is bewitched!" Silas yelled, turning to the crowd, playing his last desperate card. "I have seen her wandering the riverbank at night. She has been seduced by them. The savages have turned her mind against her own people." The crowd wavered. The fear of the other was deep, and Silas knew exactly where to press. Some of the townspeople looked at Clara with suspicion. "Lieutenant," Silas said, his voice dropping to a reasonable, oily baritone. "We have a fire burning. We have a threat. Are we going to listen to a girl who is clearly out of her mind? Or are we going to do our duty?" Lieutenant Miller looked at the paper in Clara's hand, then at the smoke, then at Silas. He was hesitating, and then the river answered. She does not speak alone. The voice came from the water, deep, resonant, and calm. From behind the massive limestone rocks that lined the far bank, figures emerged. They did not charge, they did not scream. They rose like the earth itself coming to life. Tahan sat on his paint mare, riding into the shallows. He was flanked by 3 other warriors, but they were not holding bows. They were dragging a rope. And at the end of the rope, stumbling through the knee-deep water, were 2 more white men. Their hands were bound. They wore the rough clothes of drifters. Tahan stopped the horse in the middle of the river. The sun was directly behind him now, framing him in a halo of fire. He looked like a judgment sent from the sky. "These men were caught near my camp," Tahan called out. His English was not broken today. It was sharp as a blade. "They carried kerosene. They carried Comanche arrows made in a factory in St. Louis. They told us who paid them." He jerked the rope, and the 2 men fell to their knees in the water. "Tell them," Tahan commanded. "It was Burke," one of the men screamed, terrified by the warrior towering over him. "He paid us. He said just to start a fire. He said no one would get hurt. Don't let him scalp me." The silence on the riverbank was absolute. Lieutenant Miller looked at the men in the water. Then he turned his horse slowly to face Silas Burke. "Mr. Burke," the lieutenant said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Care to explain why your hired hands are carrying fake arrows?" Silas looked around. The crowd had backed away from him. The soldiers had lowered their rifles, their expressions hardening into disgust. Elias Cooper was trying to edge away toward the back of the crowd, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the dust. The game was over. The land, the money, the power, it was all slipping through his fingers like river sand. Silas's face twisted into a snarl of pure animal panic. "I am not losing this," he screamed. "Not to a savage, not to a whore." In a blur of motion, Silas drew the heavy revolver from his hip, but he did not aim at Tahan. He grabbed Clara, wrapping his arm around her throat and jamming the barrel of the gun into her temple. "Back off!" Silas shrieked, dragging Clara backward toward the ferry ramp. "I will kill her. I swear to God I will paint this dock with her brains." The crowd screamed and scattered. The soldiers raised their carbines, but they couldn't shoot. Silas was using Clara as a human shield, his body pressed tight against hers. "Drop the guns!" Silas yelled at the lieutenant. "I am taking a horse, and I am riding out of here. If anyone follows me, the girl dies." Clara clawed at the arm choking her, but Silas was strong, fueled by desperation. The cold metal of the gun barrel dug into her skin. She could smell his sweat, sour and acrid. She looked out at the river. Tahan was moving. He did not shout. He did not hesitate. He simply launched himself from the back of his horse. He hit the water and surged forward, moving with a terrifying speed. "I said back off!" Silas screamed, cocking the hammer of the revolver. The click sounded like a thunderclap in Clara's ear. Time seemed to slow down. Clara saw the lieutenant's helpless expression. She saw Elias cowering behind a rain barrel. She saw Ben, 20 feet away, raising the old hunting rifle with hands that were shaking violently. And she saw Tahan. He was sprinting through the shallows, water spraying in sheets around him. He wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at her. His eyes were locked onto hers, fierce and burning. They were saying something. "Trust me." Clara stopped struggling. She went limp in Silas's grip. The sudden dead weight threw Silas off balance. He stumbled back a step. "Ben!" Tahan roared. It was the signal. Ben didn't think. He didn't aim for the head or the heart. He just pulled the trigger. Crack! The rifle shot went wild, hitting the wooden post of the ferry ramp inches from Silas's head. Splinters exploded into Silas's face. It wasn't a kill shot, but it was enough. Silas flinched, blindingly, for a fraction of a second. The gun barrel moved 2 inches away from Clara's head. That was all Tahan needed. He hit the dock like a mountain lion. He didn't tackle Silas. He slammed into him, driving him backward. The revolver went off boom, the bullet tearing a hole in the wooden planks where Clara's foot had been a second before. Clara was thrown to the side, landing hard on her elbows. She scrambled away, gasping for air. Silas and Tahan were a tangle of limbs on the dock. Silas was fighting for his life, striking out with the heavy pistol, but Tahan was fighting for something more. He blocked a blow, seized Silas's wrist and twisted. There was a sickening snap of bone. Silas screamed, dropping the gun, but Silas, mad with pain and rage, pulled a hidden boot knife with his left hand. He slashed wildly, the blade catching Tahan in the side. Tahan grunted but did not back down. He caught Silas's knife hand, gripping it with both of his own. They locked eyes, the land speculator and the warrior, the past and the future of the West, struggling over the blade. Silas was heavy, but Tahan was iron. Slowly, inexorably, Tahan forced the knife back. He wasn't stabbing Silas. He was simply turning the man's own violence back upon him. Silas's eyes went wide. "No," he gurgled. They fell together. The knife went deep into Silas's chest. Silas Burke gasped, his body arching once, then went still. The weight of him settled onto the dock, pinning Tahan's legs. Silence crashed back down over the riverbank. The only sound was the lapping of the water and the heavy, ragged breathing of the two men. Tahan pushed Silas's body off him and sat up. He pressed a hand to his side, where blood was welling up dark and fast between his fingers. "Tahan!" Clara scrambled across the dock, ignoring the splinters tearing at her dress. She fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his wound. "I am alive," he rasped. His teeth gritted against the pain. He looked at her, his eyes checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," she sobbed, touching his face. "No." Lieutenant Miller walked onto the dock, his boots echoing loudly. He looked down at Silas's body, then at Tahan, then at the confession paper that was still fluttering on the ground where Clara had dropped it. He bent down and picked up the paper. He read it. Then he looked at the cowering figure of Elias Cooper behind the rain barrel. "Sergeant," Miller barked, "arrest Mr. Cooper and secure those men in the river." "On what charge, sir?" the sergeant asked. "Conspiracy to incite war, attempted murder, and treason against the peace of the territory." Two soldiers dragged Elias out. He was weeping, begging, blaming Silas, blaming the heat, blaming everyone but himself. As they marched him past Clara, he didn't even look at her. He just stared at the ground, a man whose ambition had finally outstripped his courage. The townspeople stood in a stunned circle. They looked at the dead body of the man who had promised them wealth. They looked at the Comanche warrior who was bleeding on their dock, holding the hand of the ferryman's daughter. The hate didn't vanish instantly. Clara could see it in the eyes of some, the confusion, the deep-seated prejudice. But the fire was gone. The righteous anger that Silas had stoked was dead, extinguished by the cold water of truth. "You should get that wound looked at," Lieutenant Miller said to Tahan. It was not an offer of friendship, but it was an acknowledgement of humanity. "My surgeon is at the camp." Tahan looked at the officer. "I have my own medicine?" He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Clara. She wrapped her arm around his waist, taking his weight. He was heavy, solid, and warm. "Ben!" Clara called out. Her brother lowered the rifle. He was pale, shaking, looking at the dead man. But he walked over, his jaw set. "I missed," Ben whispered. "You hit exactly what you needed to," Tahan said. He reached out and gripped the boy's shoulder. "You gave me the moment. That is all a warrior needs." The sun had finally set. The river was a ribbon of black glass now. The air was cooling rapidly, stripping the heat from the day. Clara looked at Tahan. His side was bleeding, his chest was heaving, and he looked exhausted. But he was alive. They were alive. She looked at the crowd, at the faces of the people she had grown up with. She saw judgment, yes, but she also saw shame. "Let us go home," Clara said softly. She didn't mean the homestead. She didn't mean the town. She meant somewhere else. Somewhere that didn't exist yet, a place they would have to carve out of the silence between two worlds. Tahan nodded. He pulled her closer into his side, indifferent to the blood staining her dress. He looked at the river, then back at her. "The sun is down." "Clara," he whispered, his voice rough with pain and adrenaline. "We survived the fire." "Yes," she said, resting her head against his good shoulder. "We survived." They turned and began the slow, painful walk off the dock, not toward the town, but toward the darkness of the riverbank, leaving the lights of Dusty Ford flickering uncertainly behind them. The dust of Dusty Ford did not settle easily. It hung in the air for days, a fine, gritty suspension that tasted of ash and dried mud. The town was quiet, but it was a silence that felt brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. Clara walked down Main Street, her basket tucked tight against her hip. She kept her eyes forward, fixed on the wooden planks of the sidewalk, but she could feel the weight of the gaze upon her. The town had not forgotten the image of the ferryman's daughter standing on the dock, her hand in the hand of a Comanche warrior, while the body of their most prominent citizen cooled in the river mud. "Traitor," a woman whispered as Clara passed the millinery shop. It was Mrs. Gable, whose husband had been one of the loudest supporters of Silas Burke. Clara did not flinch. She did not stop. "She saved your boy's life. Martha Gable," another voice snapped. It was the blacksmith, wiping soot from his forehead. "If the soldiers had crossed that river, your son would be in the first wave taking arrows." Clara stopped the war. She stopped progress, Mrs. Gable hissed back. Clara kept walking. This was her reality now. To half the town, she was the woman who had exposed a murderer and saved their sons from a pointless massacre. To the other half, she was a pariah, a woman who had chosen a savage over her own kind, a woman who had stained her reputation beyond repair. She reached the sheriff's office, where a hand-lettered sign hung crookedly in the window, closed for inquiry. The United States Army had taken over the proceedings. Lieutenant Miller was a man of rigid procedure, and he was dismantling the empire of Silas Burke brick by brick. The investigation had been swift. The testimony of the hired hands, the confession Clara had extracted, and the undeniable corpse on the dock had made the conclusion inevitable. Silas was buried in the pauper's corner of the cemetery, unmourned. Elias Cooper sat in a cell at the fort, awaiting transport to a federal judge. His father, the banker, had suffered a stroke the morning after the arrest, leaving the bank locked and the ledgers collecting dust. The immediate threat to the Avery land was gone. There was no one left to foreclose, no one left to push for the bridge. But as Clara walked back toward the homestead, passing the whispered judgments and the averted eyes, she knew she had paid a price. She had her land, but she had lost her home. She was a stranger in the place of her birth. When she arrived at the farmhouse, she found a visitor's horse tied to the rail. It was a cavalry mount, branded with the U.S. stamp. Lieutenant Miller was sitting on the porch, drinking a cup of coffee that Martha had poured for him. He stood when Clara approached, removing his hat. "Miss Avery," he said. His voice was respectful, but there was a distance in it. "Lieutenant," Clara nodded. "Is there news of Elias?" "He is being moved to St. Louis on Friday," Miller said. He gave a full statement. "He claims he was coerced by Burke, of course, but the law will see through it. And the railroad. Delayed," Miller said. "Perhaps for a year, perhaps 2. They do not like scandals." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. He looked out toward the river, where the water flowed peacefully and deceptively calm. "I came to tell you that my report is filed," Miller said quietly. "I have stated that the Comanche band in this valley acted in self-defense. I have recommended that no punitive action be taken for the death of Silas Burke." "Thank you," Clara exhaled, feeling a knot in her chest loosen. "Do not thank me yet, Miss Avery," Miller said, his eyes hardening slightly. "I am a soldier. I follow orders. My orders from Washington have not changed. The policy remains. The reservation system is the only future the government sees for the tribes." Clara felt the chill return. "But they proved they are peaceful." "It does not matter," Miller said. "The peace is temporary. The buffalo are gone. Miss Avery, the settlers will keep coming. Today it was Silas Burke. Tomorrow it will be 1,000 families looking for a homestead. I can hold back the patrols for now, but I cannot hold back the tide. Tell your friend, tell Tahan, that if he wants his people to survive, he should go north to the agency. If he stays here, eventually, I will have to come for him. Miller put his hat back on. Good day, Miss Avery. He rode away, leaving a cloud of dust that drifted over the porch and settled on Clara's skin. That night, the moon was a thin sliver, offering little light. Clara slipped out of the house after Martha and Ben had gone to sleep. She did not need a lantern. Her feet knew the path to the river by heart. She reached the cottonwood grove, the place where the shadows were deepest. She did not call out. She simply waited. He was there before she saw him. One moment she was alone with the wind. The next, a warm hand closed over hers. Tahan stepped out of the darkness. He moved stiffly, favoring his left side where Silas's knife had cut him. The bandage was clean, bound tight with leather strips. You should be resting, Clara whispered, her hand going instinctively to his waist, near the wound. I can rest when I'm dead, Tahan said. His voice was rough, tired, but the warmth in it was unmistakable. He pulled her into the shelter of the trees, away from the open bank where a patrol might spot a silhouette. The soldier came today, Clara said, leaning into him. He said you are safe for now, but he said you must go north. I know, Tahan said. The bluecoats always sing the same song. He said he cannot stop what is coming. He is right, Tahan admitted. He looked down at her, his eyes searching her face in the gloom. We are leaving. Clara, the council has decided. We move south, toward the high plains, away from the reservation. It will be a hard life. We will be hunted. We will be hungry. Clara felt her heart stop. When? 2 days. When the moon is dark. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the dust of the town that still clung to her skin. You must stay here, he said firmly. Clara pulled back, startled. What? You saved your land, Tahan said. The banker is gone. The railroad is stopped. You have what you fought for. You can live here. You can be safe. Safe, Clara laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. Have you walked through that town? Tahan, they look at me like I am a leper. I have no place there anymore. You have a roof, Tahan insisted. You have food. If you come with me. Clara, do you know what it means to sleep in the snow? To wonder if the water is poisoned, to run until your horse drops? I cannot ask you to choose that. You are not asking, Clara said fiercely. I am choosing. It is not a choice. Tahan's voice rose, cracking with emotion. It is a sentence I love you too much to watch you wither in the wind. I want you to live. I want you to grow old by this river, where you belong. I belong where my soul is. Clara grabbed the lapels of his buckskin shirt. And you took it. You stood right there and told me you were my sunset. You cannot give that back. Tahan, it is done. He stared at her, his resistance crumbling under the sheer force of her will. He let out a groan, a sound of defeat and desire mixed together, and pulled her against him. His mouth found hers. It was not the gentle kiss of the first evening, nor the desperate kiss of the war camp. This was a kiss of grief and possession. It was a goodbye that refused to be spoken. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing herself as close as possible, trying to eliminate the space between them. She could feel the heat of his skin through his shirt, the steady, powerful thrum of his heart against her chest. They sank down onto the bed of fallen leaves and soft moss beneath the trees. The darkness was absolute, wrapping them in a private world. His hands moved over her back, memorizing the curve of her spine, the tension in her shoulders. He kissed her throat, her jaw, the hollow behind her ear, murmuring words in Comanche that she did not understand but felt in her marrow. Clara, he whispered against her skin. My river. She held him, her hands tangling in his long hair. It was intimate, raw, and achingly tender. They lay there for a long time, just holding each other, defying the separation that the world demanded. They did not cross the final line. The air was too heavy with the threat of departure for that kind of surrender. Instead, they shared a closeness that was almost more profound, the shared breath of two people standing on the edge of a cliff. When he finally pulled away, the loss was physical. a cold ache where his warmth had been. 2 days, he said, his voice a husk. At sunset, if you are not there, I will know you chose safety, and I will not blame you. He kissed her palm, closed her fingers over it, and vanished into the night like a shadow reclaiming its own. The next day, the homestead felt different. It was no longer a cage. It was a shell. Clara moved through the chores mechanically. She fed the chickens, she swept the porch, she folded the laundry. But her eyes were constantly drawn to the horizon, to the line of trees that marked the boundary between her old life and the unknown. Ben found her in the barn, packing a saddlebag. She wasn't hiding it. She was putting in sturdy woolen socks, a tin cup, a box of matches, and the knife she had used to cut the ropes on the dock. "You are going," Ben said. Clara stopped. She looked at her brother. He was leaning against a stall door, chewing on a piece of straw. He looked like a man. "I have to," Clara said simply. Ben nodded slowly. "I figured. You have been gone for a long time. Clara, even when you were sitting right here at dinner." "Mama," Clara started, her voice trembling. "Mama is scared," Ben said, "but she is not blind. She saw you on that dock. She saw him jump in front of a gun for you. Elias Cooper never would have jumped. Elias would have used you as a shield." Ben walked over and put his hand on the saddlebag. "I can run the ferry," Ben said. "I know the currents. I know the seasons. And without the debt, we can make it work. I will take care of her. Clara, you do not owe us your life anymore." Clara hugged him, burying her face in his dusty shirt. He smelled of hay and hard work. "You grew up so fast. Ben had to," he said, his voice thick. "Go, before I start crying like a baby." The hardest battle was the kitchen table. Martha Avery sat with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She watched Clara walk in with the saddlebag over her shoulder. Clara braced herself for the screaming, for the guilt, for the tears. But Martha just looked at the bag. "Is it sturdy?" Martha asked quietly. "Yes, Mama, it is leather." "Good. The wind out there, it eats through cloth." Martha stood up. She walked over to the mantel and took down a small wooden box. She opened it and took out a silver locket. It was old, tarnished, with a tiny, faded portrait of Clara's father inside. "I married your father because he was kind," Martha said, looking at the locket. "And because he had a farm. I was 17. My father told me love was a luxury, like sugar. He told me safety was bread. You need bread to live." She looked up at Clara. Her eyes were wet, rimmed with red. "I have eaten a lot of bread, Clara, and I have been very safe. But I have watched you these last few weeks. You are not safe. You are burning. You are like a lantern that has finally been lit." Martha pressed the locket into Clara's hand. "I cannot ask you to stay and blow out the light," Martha whispered. "Go. Follow your sunset, but promise me you will survive. I promise," Clara choked out. Martha pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, hugging her with a strength that belied her frail frame. "Do not look back. Clara, if you look back, you will turn to salt. Just ride." The sun began to lower on the second day. The sky turned a brilliant, bruised purple, streaked with gold and crimson. It was the kind of sunset that made the heart ache with its beauty. Clara saddled the roan mare, the horse she had ridden since she was a girl. She tied the saddlebag tight. She checked the cinch. She rode out of the yard without looking at the house. She could feel Martha and Ben watching from the window, but she honored her mother's request. She did not look back. She rode to the riverbank. The town of Dusty Ford lay to her left, quiet and sullen in the evening light. The ferry sat motionless at the dock, a silent testament to the battle that had been fought there. Clara reached the limestone rock. She dismounted and stood by the water. The river was flowing steadily. Indifferent to the dramas of men, she waited. The sun dipped lower. The shadows stretched out, long and grasping. The doubt came then, a cold whisper in her ear. "What if he doesn't come? What if he decided he was right? And you were better off here? What if the soldiers found them?" She stood alone on the edge of the world, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am here," she whispered to the wind. "I chose—" The sun touched the horizon, igniting the water one last time. And then she saw it. On the far bank, emerging from the tree line like a spirit, was the paint mare. Tahan sat tall in the saddle. He was not wearing war paint. He was wearing travel clothes, leather and fur. He stopped at the water's edge. He did not cross. He simply waited. He was giving her the final choice. The river was the line. On this side, civilization, safety, and a hollow heart. On that side, the wild, the hunger, and the fire. Clara mounted her horse. She did not hesitate. She gripped the reins and urged the roan forward. The horse stepped into the water. The current was cold, swirling around the animal's legs. Clara kept her eyes fixed on the man on the far bank. She was crossing the Rubicon. She was crossing the Styx. She was crossing the Red River. As she reached the deep channel, the water rose to her stirrups. Her horse swam, strong and sure. She climbed the muddy bank on the other side, dripping wet, breathless. Tahan watched her come. His face remained stoic, but his eyes were shining with a relief so profound it looked like pain. He reached out his hand. Clara took it. His grip was warm, solid, and permanent. "You are late," he said softly, the old teasing note returning to his voice, though it wavered slightly. "The sunset takes its time," Clara replied. He turned his horse toward the west, toward the vast, open plains that rolled out into the twilight. "Come," he said. "The tribe is waiting." They rode together into the trees, leaving the river behind, leaving the world of maps and fences behind. As the darkness swallowed them, Clara felt a strange lightness. She had lost everything she was supposed to want and found the only thing she needed. The sunset was over. The night had begun, and she was not afraid of the dark. The water of the Red River dripped from the hem of Clara's skirt, turning the red dust of the northern bank into mud. She sat on her roan mare, shivering slightly, not from cold, but from the enormity of the line she had just crossed. Tahan did not mount his horse immediately. He stood on the ground, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He walked toward her, not with the swagger of a warrior who had won a prize, but with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who understood the weight of what he was asking. He stopped at her stirrup and looked up. The war paint was gone. The aggression of the battle on the dock was gone. He looked merely human, stripped down to the bone by exhaustion and hope. He rested a hand on her horse's neck. "You are wet," he said softly. "The river is high," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. Tahan looked past her, across the churning water to the southern bank. The lights of Dusty Ford were just beginning to flicker on in the twilight, small pinpricks of civilization against the encroaching dark. The silhouette of the Avery homestead was barely visible, a jagged shape against the horizon. "It is not too late," Tahan said. He did not look at her. He looked at the land she had left behind. "The water washes away the trail. You could turn back. You could dry your clothes by your mother's fire. You could keep your land." Clara looked back too. She thought of the deed to the property, safe in the strongbox. She thought of the smell of her mother's bread and the sound of the ferry chains clanking in the wind. It was a life. It was a good life. Perhaps a safe life. Then she looked down at Tahan. She saw the scar on his shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. She saw the dark, intelligent eyes that had seen her when she was invisible to everyone else. "The land will be there," Clara said quietly. "The dirt does not move, but I am not sure how long the world will have men like you in it, Tahan. If I stay with the land, I keep the earth but lose the sky." Tahan turned his gaze to her. A slow, fierce smile broke across his face, cracking the stoicism he wore like armor. "Then we ride," he said. But before they turned their horses toward the heavy timber where the tribe waited, Clara allowed herself one moment to remember the goodbye. It had happened only an hour ago, but it felt like a memory from another lifetime. She had met them at the edge of the property, near the old split-rail fence where the road turned toward town. Ben had been leaning against the post, trying to look older than his 16 years. Martha stood straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. There had been no screaming, no weeping. The battle on the dock had burned all the hysteria out of the Avery family, leaving only a quiet, hard truth. "You are a fool, Clara," Martha had said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. It sounded tired. "You are trading a roof for a tent. You are trading security for starvation." "I am trading existence for life." "Mama," Clara had replied, tightening the cinch on her saddle. Martha had stepped forward then. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a square of white linen. It was a handkerchief, the edges embroidered with delicate blue flowers, but the pattern was unfinished. The needle was still threaded, stuck through the fabric, leaving a trail of blue silk hanging loose. "I started this when I was 20, Martha whispered, pressing the cloth into Clara's hand. "Before your father died, before the drought, before I became a woman who only looked at ledgers, I wanted to make something beautiful. I never finished it." Clara ran her thumb over the rough embroidery. "Take it," Martha said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Finish the pattern, Clara, or unravel it and make your own. But do not leave it half done like I did." Clara had hugged her mother then, breathing in the scent of flower and lavender water for the last time. It was a fierce, desperate embrace, the kind that acknowledged they might never touch again. Then she turned to Ben. Her brother did not hug her. He held out his hand, man to man. "I will watch the river," Ben said, his grip strong. "If you ever need to cross back, the ferry will be waiting. Take care of her. Ben," Clara had said. "I will." "And Clara," Ben hesitated, then grinned, a flash of the boy remaining in the man. "Give Silas Burke's ghost hell for me." The memory faded as Tahan swung onto his paint mare. He whistled low, and they turned away from the river, riding into the deepening shadows of the valley. The arrival at the camp was different this time, when Clara had come before. During the night of the raid, the air had been thick with suspicion and sharp knives. Now, as she rode in beside Tahan, the atmosphere was one of quiet curiosity. The fires were burning low. The women were gathering for the evening meal. As Clara dismounted, her legs stiff from the ride, she felt the weight of 100 eyes upon her. Black Wolf was there, sharpening a lance by the central fire. He looked up. He saw the white woman standing in the center of the camp, her chin high, her hand resting on the neck of her horse. He looked at Tahan, then back at Clara. He remembered the dock. He remembered how she had stood between a gun and his war leader. Black Wolf stood up. He did not smile. He simply nodded, a sharp, singular dip of his chin. Before returning to his work, it was not friendship, but it was acceptance. She was no longer an invader. She was a survivor. An older woman, Tahan's aunt, stepped forward. She carried a buffalo robe, heavy and warm. She walked up to Clara and draped it over her wet shoulders. She said nothing in English, but her hands were gentle as she adjusted the fur. Clara pulled the robe tight. It smelled of smoke and earth. It smelled like home. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The tribe moved south, following the game trails, staying ahead of the winter winds and the cavalry patrols. For Clara, life became a montage of harsh lessons and small victories. The romance of the sunset was replaced by the reality of the dawn. She learned that her hands, once soft from mending nets, could bleed from scraping hides. She learned that hunger was a constant companion, a sharp pain that lived in the belly. She learned the language of the camp. At first, it was just sounds, hard consonants, and flowing vowels that twisted her tongue. But Tahan was patient. "Pia," he would say, pointing to the fire. "Pa, for the water." She sat with the children in the afternoons, while the men scouted. She taught them English words, tree, horse, friend, knowing that this language, the language of the conquerors, might one day be a weapon they would need to survive. In return, they taught her how to listen. They taught her that the wind in the grass spoke of weather, and the behavior of the birds spoke of danger. One evening, Clara sat trying to stitch a pair of moccasins. The bone needle slipped, pricking her finger. She sucked the drop of blood, frustrated. Tahan sat beside her, whittling a piece of ash wood. "You pull the thread too tight," he observed. "You try to force the leather. You must let it bend." "I'm clumsy," Clara muttered. "I will never be Comanche." "You are not Comanche," Tahan said. "You are Clara, and you are here." He took her hand, inspecting the calluses that had formed on her palms. "These are honest hands," he said. "They work. That is enough." Clara leaned against him, looking at the stars that spanned the vast, open prairie like a ceiling of diamonds. She was tired. Her back ached. She missed the softness of a feather bed. But as she took a deep breath of the cool, clean air, she realized something profound. She was breathing. For the first time in 23 years, the corset of expectation was gone. She was not a daughter, a debtor, or a fiancée. She was simply herself. But the world was closing in. The buffalo were harder to find. The patrols were venturing further south. One night, the council gathered. The elder, now frail and wrapped in many blankets, sat by the fire. Tahan and Clara sat across from him. "The winter will be hard," the elder wheezed. "The bluecoats burn the grass to starve the ponies. We cannot run forever." "We do not run," Tahan said. "We move." "Where?" Black Wolf asked from the shadows. "The reservation is a cage. The plains are empty." Clara spoke up. Her Comanche was halting, but intelligible. "There is a place," she said. "In the south, near the border of Mexico." The men looked at her. "I read about it in the newspapers." Clara continued, switching to English as Tahan translated. "There are ranches there, places where the law is thin. There is a white man who married a Kiowa woman. They run a station for cattle. They have a school." "A white school," Black Wolf spat. "A school for both." Clara said firmly. "A place where a child can learn to read the white man's paper and still hunt the deer. A bridge." Tahan looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had burned on the dock. "We cannot be only Comanche anymore," Tahan told the council. "And she cannot be only white. We are something new. If we stay here, we die fighting. If we go to the reservation, we die sleeping. We must find a third path." The elder nodded slowly. "The river changes its course when the rocks block the way. We will go south." It was a hope. It was fragile, like a seed in winter, but it was alive. On their final evening before the long push south, they found themselves camped near a tributary of the Red River. It was not the same crossing where they had met, but the water flowed red and thick, singing the same song. Clara walked to the water's edge as the sun began to set. The sky was a riot of orange and purple, painting the water in shifting colors. She sat on a rock, watching the current. Dusty Ford was 100 miles away, a lifetime ago. She wondered if Ben was watching the same sunset. She wondered if Martha was finishing the embroidery. Tahan came up behind her. He did not startle her this time. Her spirit had attuned to his. She felt his presence like a change in the wind. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You are watching again," he murmured. "I used to sit by the water every day." Clara said softly, "I thought I was waiting for something to happen to me. I thought I was waiting for a savior, or a sign." She leaned her head back against him. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I was waiting for myself. I was waiting for the part of me that was brave enough to stand up." Tahan turned her in his arms. The dying light cast his face in copper and shadow. He looked older than when they had first met. There were new lines around his eyes, etched by the sun and the worry of leadership. But he was beautiful. "You found her," Tahan said. "The brave woman. She was never lost. She was just sleeping." He stroked her hair, his touch gentle. "Do you remember what I told you?" he asked. "That day on the bank, you said you were my sunset." Clara smiled. "I was wrong too," Tahan said. He looked deep into her eyes, and the intensity of his gaze stole the breath from her lungs. "No, I am your sunset. I am the fire that ends the day. But you," He gestured to the water flowing endlessly beside them. You are my river. Clara, you are the thing that keeps moving. You are the life that cuts through the stone. The sunset burns out, but the river flows in the dark. Without you, I am just a moment. With you, I am on a journey. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears, hot and cleansing. Then we flow together, she whispered. South, to the sea. Wherever it goes, he promised. He kissed her then, and it was a kiss that tasted of the future. It was not a promise of safety. It was not a guarantee of easy days. It was a covenant of blood and breath. It was an acknowledgement that the world was hard, but they were harder. The sun slipped below the horizon, plunging the world into the soft, gray velvet of twilight. They stood there for a long moment, two silhouettes against the fading light. To the north lay the railroads and the fences, the inexorable march of a machine that would consume the west. To the south lay the unknown, the mountains, and the long, dusty road to a new kind of freedom. Behind them, the camp was striking the tents. The horses were being loaded. The people were moving. A slow, resilient column of humanity refusing to vanish. Tahan took Clara's hand. Come, he said. The stars are waking up. Clara looked one last time at the river. It flowed on, indifferent and eternal, carrying the red mud of Texas toward the ocean. I am ready, she said. They walked back toward the horses, their shadows merging into one long shape on the prairie grass. They did not look back. They had learned the lesson of the land. Freedom was not a place you found on a map. Freedom was the name of the choices you dared to carry, and the hand you held while you walked into the dark. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Clara and Tahan. It has been a long ride from the riverbank at Dusty Ford to the open plains of the South. I am grateful you took this journey with me. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Are you watching the sunset somewhere in the world right now? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and to give this video a like. And if you really want to help these stories reach more people, go ahead and smash that hype button. It truly helps keep the campfire burning. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.